Hi, what's up? So, I have been gone for quite a while, I understand that, but it's summer now, it's the middle of summer, and I thought I wrote this essay a while ago, and I thought that I would share it, and it's basically about dystopian fiction, and why is dystopian, or dystopian sci-fi particularly, why is it such a popular genre? And why has it become such a way for so many different authors to voice like their own sort of social commentary? Authors from so many different viewpoints, etc., etc. Why is it so popular, and why, even if it is extremely bleak, do we continue to read it? Is it out of a sense of morbid curiosity, because I honestly think that's why, or is it out of a sense of wanting to see our own future, or wanting to see what could happen, what we don't want to happen? Is it a way of analyzing our own world? Well, let's talk about it. This is a discussion. It's probably going to be very open-ended, and I am not going to have any definitive answers, okay? But this is just a discussion so we can think about it. Okay. Also, I have some Arizona. I have a collection of Arizona tea over there. But it's really hot up here, and I, for some freaking reason, am wearing a sweater. So if I look like I'm sweating, then I probably am. So one of the novels we're going to be talking about is obviously the most well-known, the most cliche dystopian sci-fi book, 1984, because it is probably the easiest to talk about, because I would say it is the most well-known. Like, most people, I think, have read this book, or at least most people who are into books have read this book, or at least sci-fi. It's a very popular book to read in high schools as well, so a lot of people have a general knowledge of it. Okay, so power is in tearing the human mind to pieces and putting them together again in new shapes of your own choosing. You know, like most people, I was petrified when I was first reading 1984, because it does feel like horror, you know. Once I read this book, I actually became more fascinated with this genre that Orwell was writing in. And Orwell also kind of did define the genre from then on of dystopian. You can't, it's sort of like the Lord of the Rings of dystopian sci-fi, Orwell's book is. Like, you can't go anywhere without seeing some reference to it. You know how, like, in every fantasy series there are elves, there's dwarves, etc., usually? Well, that's kind of the parallel I like to draw. And I know a lot of people do not enjoy the bleakness of it, and I get it. I've recommended it to friends, and sometimes they're like, it's a little too bleak for me, and I'm like, yeah, I get that. That's okay. It is quite bleak, and if that's something you don't like, then that's very understandable. But anyways, I was really interested in this genre, so it sent me down, like, I've always loved sci-fi, so it sent me down this rabbit hole of reading similar sort of dystopian books, like a lot of the classics that people had been recommending to me, basically just the ones you hear referenced a lot, so that I could kind of understand the popularity of the genre. So I read Brave New World. Brave New World is quite good, and it is a little similar, but it's also quite different, and it critiques different things, I'd say. I read We by Zamyatin, although it's been quite a while. I've read War of the Worlds. I love War of the Worlds, as well as The Time Machine, and I'm not sure if those two would actually be considered some form of dystopian, but they do definitely have social commentary in them, so we'll add them in. I read Fahrenheit. I did not love it. I read Clockwork Orange as well. Again, I'm not sure if that's considered dystopian, but again, there's social commentary in it, and it's sort of dystopic, so we're going to talk about it. And also The Handmaid's Tale, we can talk about that as well. So let's continue. So why is it exactly that we read this literature? What's so significant about it? What's interesting about it? What does it have to do with our current world? Why do people constantly bring it up? I think that it has to do with the parallels that people see in these books to our society, as well as the lasting impacts these books have on us and our critical thoughts. Like, just thinking about it, they make you paranoid, basically. They can make you a little paranoid. What parallels am I talking about exactly? Well, people usually talk about, like, a lot of the technological aspects, so, like, for example, the telescreens, or, like, the constant surveillance, which does hit a little close to home. And people like to joke about having surveillance on them all the time. Like, people joke about that now. Like, that's how common of an idea it is. And this idea of there being this, like, weird screen in our homes at all times has also become a common thing, which I think is funny. Also, the idea of thought crimes and stuff like that, people will argue about that as well. Similar themes of policing of society and thought can be found in We, Brave New World, as well as Fahrenheit. Some of the books that I had mentioned previously. These books often bring up like moral questions about our society and parallels that we can draw. For years, sci-fi in particular has been used to voice a lot of social commentary, like I was saying, and it gives us a lot of moral questions, and a lot of times sci-fi was also used to ask questions about the future. What could humanity be like? Could it be better? Could it be worse? Where are we going? What are the worst case scenarios? You know, stuff like that. And a lot of authors will have these concerns, especially after living through certain things. Like, for example, Orwell lived through World War II, so he also lived through World War I too. I think he was in the war. Correct me if I'm wrong. But anyways, he saw basically the worst of humanity through Germany and also Stalin, and he had critiques of both. And so that's why you can't really pin down this book in a lot of ways, because it kind of just has a mix of the worst aspects possible in it. But also, a less well-known fact is that Orwell worked for the BBC for a while. He worked for the BBC for a while, and basically he got a lot of his ideas for the Ministry of Truth from working at the BBC. So not only did Orwell's experience during the war and living through that affect him, but also his own government and the policing that the British government did at the time, that also affected him, because no government is perfect, right? And so all these different things that he experienced, he put into 1984, and basically the most extreme case scenario, which he had also seen some of the most extreme case scenarios in real life. So this sort of social commentary, like I was saying, has most famously been brought to light in 1984, written in 1948. There are many different interpretations of the book, but vastly it is agreed upon in the world of 1984 that its ideals is something we want to avoid under any circumstances, just that society we want to avoid. The book is only about 300 pages, but it crafts such a bleak, inescapable, horrifying society that it almost feels too close to home and almost entrapping when you read it. Once you're done with it, it's kind of just well known that you're going to be a little paranoid for a while. Like, a lot of people get paranoid after they read this book. I was told, yeah, you probably will be once you read it, and I was like, nah, and then I kind of was. That's why I think it is kind of difficult for some people to get through, if that makes sense. So, in his book, Orwell put names on a lot of phenomena that was already happening, that has always happened, and is popular with, like, government stuff, you know. So he put names on the phenomenon known as doublethink, thought crime, and doublespeak. Doublespeak is the deliberate use of language to distort or change the meaning of something. It's basically a way to lie without lying, and doublethink is the act of having two contradictory beliefs at once. And you think that's not possible, but a lot of us have lied to ourselves at some point, right? So, in this book, the main character, Winston, knows that 2 + 2 = 4, but he must also believe that 2 + 2 = 5, because that's what Big Brother says, basically. And if he doesn't, he'll have committed a thought crime and he will be vaporized. He will have never existed, basically. Not only will he be dead, or dead, we don't really know. He doesn't really know. You never really know what happens to these people. It's just, they disappear and you pretend they never existed, basically. Which, again, I think that the idea of that kind of comes from what Orwell had witnessed in his own life, right? Or not in his own life, but with societies in his own life. So Russia, and recently, this is not recently, this is a while ago, because I wrote this a while ago. So I think I had an argument with someone on social media. I was told that basically I shouldn't think about this stuff or how they really affect real life, but the thing is, because we all know, media doesn't actually affect public consciousness. I mean, social commentary, what's that? So yeah, I think I was really bitter, so I wrote this essay. I think that's a weak argument, because media obviously affects the way we perceive things. Often people write their own thoughts, experiences, and concerns into their literature or other forms of media. People are affected by this media, right? Orwell himself had just lived through World War II when he wrote in 1984, so one can assume he in particular knew the warnings of a dystopia, or things going wrong, basically. In these dystopian books, some of the ideas can be found in simple quotes. One from 1984 is, "Who controls the past controls the future. Who controls the present controls the past." Now, the first time I heard this quote was in a Rage Against the Machine song. I'm trying to remember what song that was. Testify, it was Testify. Who controls the past now controls the future. Who controls the present now controls the past. So yeah, that's a bob. But This is a quote that basically explains the party and its big brother ideology in one sentence. The party has control of everything. They can change the past, therefore control the future and the present. They can manipulate the surroundings of the people. And most governments, I feel like, do this in general. Aldous Huxley, I love that name. For some reason, I love the name Aldous. In Aldous Huxley's Brave New World, we get the quote, "But I don't want comfort. I want God, I want poetry, I want real danger, I want freedom, I want goodness, I want sin." This has to do with the large-scale kind of numbing of society that he writes about in the book. There's no actual pain or even real emotion. So without pain, in a way, I think this book portrays that without pain, you can't feel real happiness. And I think those are just two things that you have to live with, is that you're going to live with pain, but these people don't have pain, so can they ever feel true happiness? That's kind of a thing that I thought about. So the character that says this is known only as John the Savage, who is an outsider in the novel. He has similar ideals to usually the reader, but lives on a reservation and is kind of considered feral, basically. He's considered he's considered a savage, basically. So basically he's an outsider. Yet this savage is a Shakespeare fan and it has been pointed out by SparkNotes in their biography on the character of John in Brave New World that John, the character, himself is Shakespearean, especially in his own story and how it ends. John is a Shakespearean character in a world where literature and important figures of the past have been forgotten. When John introduces Romeo and Juliet to some people raised in the world state, they laugh it off and find it ridiculous because these vital human ideals seem primitive, right? And so I think this book was based a lot on the idea of us forgetting literature and basically forgetting about how history shapes the modern society, and the reason we are where we are now is because of history, and people have kind of forgotten that by then and kind of forget about literature and stuff like that. People will often draw parallels between 1984 and Brave New World. Some even claim that our world is a weird combination between the two. I've seen this so many times, like it's like 1984 and Brave New World, and that is a little cliche. It's really not that bad yet. People do like to overblow it sometimes. I get it, things are bad, but still. So now that we've discussed 1984, other than the character of John, what's up with Brave New World? Like, why do people read it? Oh, kitty! You wanna see Lucy? This is Lucy. She's a sweet little baby. She hates me. She's gonna run away now. Lucy, baby. You meow? Meow? Okay. Anyways. Well, in the society of Brave New World, people are not born through a mother and a father, rather in a lab called a hatchery. In fact, the idea disgusts them. The idea of a mother and a father is a primitive and like a taboo one. There's kind of no true deep anything. There's no deep emotion, no deep love, no deep care, no deep hate, no deep really anything. So it kind of makes the human experience pretty much devoid of everything that you would experience now, basically, or maybe would have experienced in the past. So there's no real pain. Because of the way people are in the society, very like devoid of anything, they can't understand like the tragedy of like Romeo and Juliet. It's very laughable to them. They don't understand the pain. So like the only character who really understands it is the savage. There are particular classes, and people are, with the exception of a few, glad to be what they are told to be. They are genetically engineered and conditioned to do and feel certain things. If one doesn't want to be uncomfortable, they take soma. The worry melts away, and any conflict one could ever feel is gone. Some see this as a critique of recreational drug use, but that doesn't seem completely valid, as Huxley also wrote The Doors of Perception. It seems the problem is that people rely on soma rather than use it, to feel less of everything. Also, fun fact, The Doors, the band, like Jim Morrison, all those people, based their name on Doors of Perception. It's a very, very 60s thing. The most shocking part of the novel is that this is the result of the people's own doing. Oh, Lucy. They did it to themselves. This is also one of the key differences between the two novels. As much as I enjoy 1984, I feel that one of the ways in which Brave New World is more accurate is the fact that people did it to themselves. If you think about it, isn't that kind of what happens? Other than these two books I've written in depth about, what are some of the other notable dystopian novels that people talk about all the time, and what are they about? Again, I'm talking about very popular novels so that, people can get this general knowledge of stuff they may have heard about and blah, 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 blah. As I mentioned before, some other novels that have interesting commentaries are Fahrenheit 451, We, It's a Time Machine, as well as The Handmaid's Tale. All of these books touch on or critique certain aspects of society, and also I want to talk about War of the Worlds, but I forgot to write it into this essay. In In Fahrenheit 451 by Ray Bradbury, the critique is also about the large-scale desensitization of society and how conveniences and technology can lead to the lack of deep thought and similar things. It's about the relationship of thought and censorship. People are often kept in sort of an ignorant bliss, and everything is about the snap ending. This book is particularly famous, but has also got a fair amount of criticism for its seemingly rushed or pretentious ideals. And yeah, I agree. I'm sorry, but I do not love Fahrenheit. I do think some people enjoy it, but it seems a little watered down, a little rushed. Like, I remember reading it and it felt kind of rushed to me. And I understand that I think Bradbury wrote it quite fast. And it's ironic because I quite love The Martian Chronicles by Bradbury. That's one of my favorite, some of my favorite sci-fi is in that book, especially, Mars is Heaven. Anyways, I think that's not my favorite. I would still recommend it. It's not that long of a read, and I think other people might enjoy it, but it does seem a little too much like 1984 and A Brave New World. And if you disagree, that's fine. If you love this book, it's fine. In A Clockwork Orange by Anthony Burgess, ooh, yeah, it's more famous as a movie, right? Ooh, yeah, kind of traumatizing movie. I do love the movie, but it's also, watch it at your own risk, that's all I'm gonna say. In A Clockwork Orange by Anthony Burgess, a novel which was later famously adapted into a Stanley Kubrick film, a strange slang-like language called nadsat is used to tell a controversial story about mankind's freedom to choose either good or evil, and what it would be like if the state could control that particular choice. In the first half of the book, it is the main character Alex and his troops basically committing acts of ultra-violence, while the second half brings in the moral question and the consequences of Alex's actions. What I find most fascinating about this book is actually its use of language. Basically, it's using nadsat, this kind of Russian sort of, also a mix of Russian and English dialect. It's very fascinating because it does seem like teenagers and, young people, just people in general, over the years will talk in a sort of slang. And it's fascinating that he wanted to keep the book kind of young forever by using a completely non-existent slang. It exists in its own plane, basically. In We by Zamyatin, the society is a sort of satire of a collectivist state. The main character's name is literally a number. His name is D503, and the book is his journal, basically. And D503's society freedom is kind of considered primitive, and yeah, I read this book very fast, and I do not remember a ton from it, so sorry about that. If you guys like that book, tell me more about it, because I do not remember everything. I think I listened to it on an audiobook, and that's the issue, because sometimes I get distracted when I listen to audiobooks. So in The Time Machine by H.G. Wells, we get a glimpse at the distant future through the eyes of the time traveler, wherein we see weak, childlike creatures portrayed as having once been part of the upper class, while we also see these underground monster-like creatures who represent the lower class. This is obviously a poke at the class system, which was very, very, very prominent in Victorian society. People of different classes at the time would never even, really interact. It was two different societies. It was, two cities. No, not A Tale of Two Cities. That's that book is about completely different things. I'm dumb. But it is, it's quite obvious how Wells does that. It is, not hard to understand that it's basically satire almost of what the modern Victorian society was like. And then also in his novel, The War of the Worlds, I see it as kind of similar because, these aliens coming in and invading Britain, it's very ironic because Britain at that time had been this massive colonial power going in and invading places, basically kind of not really caring. So similarly, these aliens come and invade them. It's basically this weird Victorian fear of reverse colonization, this fear that they would fall off and they would get colonized too, they colonized Ireland and Africa and a bunch of, or not all of Africa, but parts of Africa, India, all these different places, Australia. They were able to do that, but what if it happened to them? And I think that's kind of what that particular book, The World of the Worlds, is about. Maybe I'm wrong. It could be some other things. So why are these novels even important? Why are they so lasting in our society, or at least in our consciousness as readers, as well as our consciousness? And what is the point in even reading them? And why do people continue to read them if they're so bleak or so depressing or whatever? Which I think a lot of people don't really understand about dystopian literature, is that it's so depressing. It's why do you read that? Why do you even... I think these novels are so lasting and so important, basically because of how effective they usually are in portraying their messages. Often, when you read one of these books, you will often find yourself picking out how particular details or aspects of the dystopia relate to you, your society, the past, whatever. Plus, we see these bleak, cruel, and manipulative worlds, and they sort of shock us into thinking about that sort of thing, I suppose, and to thinking about the consequences that led to that. I realized I just forgot to talk about The Handmaid's Tale. The Handmaid's Tale by Margaret Atwood is about a near-future dystopian society in which kind of the subservience of women is sort of justified through basically having women called handmaids have the children of high-ranking men. And like in many dystopias, one of the main themes of the novel is power, who has it, and what happens when it falls into the wrong hands. So yeah, and a lot of themes in dystopian novels are power, and who has it, and who should have it, etc. That's another big thing. Sorry, I forgot to talk about that. Back to the conclusion. So basically what I was saying, when we see these bleak, cruel, and manipulative worlds, they sort of shock us into thinking about that sort of thing. They kind of linger after you're done reading them. Particularly, they make us aware of why it was so important often to be critical of one's surroundings. Because when you see these worst case scenarios, they make you think about, like, what could happen in the future? They make us aware of the consequences of not, like, basically questioning what we know and hear, especially when it comes from anyone in power or just really any group of people, governments, leaders all over the world, whatever, etc. Or even your parents, I don't even know. These authors and many more have given us terrifying taste of what could be the future, a warning, if you will, and I believe that we should at least consider what they're saying. And I think it's very interesting how so many different authors have used their own fears and their own sort of experiences to create their personal, almost personal, worst case scenario. And it's really just terrifying how bad things could go, but things could also go good. And I think, whatever. Because once you sort of read 1984, a lot of stuff is sort of put into words, and you'll probably be pretty terrified of these macabre sort of worlds that Orwell, Huxley, and other authors have pretty meticulously crafted, that you'll probably start to think. A lot of these novels basically kind of have this theme of power, or what we do to ourselves, what we let happen, what we let slide, etc. If we don't think about things, this could happen, etc. And I think that's why they're so interesting, because so many people can relate to this. The idea of being controlled or controlling, etc. is just a very big thing. And I think also these books sort of help us consider almost our own futures and what we want for the future, what we want to prevent. So if we relate to any of these authors and their fears, then how do we change that? How do we prevent that from happening? And I think that's usually why people read these books. Also, in kind of this rise of people being sort of, what would you say, pessimistic? People have gotten, I think, more pessimistic over the years, or a lot of people in my generation seem to be very pessimistic, just because when you grow up with the internet, you see the worst things happening in the world, so therefore you can kind of relate to novels like this because you're sort of afraid of the future. But at the same time, if we read these critiques, maybe we can sort of help create or help personally understand what we actually want, And it's so important to consider this literature, because the society we see in these books so often mirror our own enough that one wrong turn, it almost feels like it, one wrong turn can lead to these books burning, or Big Brother, which books have been burned before, in World War II. Big Brother, or A None Too Brave, Brave New World. And so this is kind of why. So, it's kind of an open-ended thing. Why are we so interested in dystopian? Why is it an important genre? And why do people use it so well for social commentary? And I think it really just has to do with people's personal fears, their interests, their views, whatever. Often they will go into a book. And so, in general, I think these are kind of the reasons why we're so interested in this sort of literature, despite it being very bleak, is that the morbid curiosity of humans and a lot of people's fears of our future, and just general interest in sci-fi and stuff like that. So yeah, and I'd say that's pretty much it, and I'll cite my sources in the description. So yeah, I would recommend most of these books if you're into science fiction, or if you're into dystopian stuff or anything like that. In general, I would recommend most people read 1984 at some point, because it's just one of those things that people will constantly bring up. Even if you're not into books, people will be like, this is like 1984, or claim that things are like 1984, and really you want to have read it to understand if these things actually are or they aren't, because people do throw it around quite a lot. It's kind of like how people call things Machiavellian without understanding that, or people call things Lovecraftian without understanding that. It's that sort of thing. And also, I should note that Orwellian does not necessarily mean authoritarian. People call authoritarian stuff Orwellian. That's not necessarily too true. The word for that is authoritarian, but Orwellian in particular actually is the use of manipulative language to change people's thoughts, or basically it's the use of manipulative language by anyone, or in power, people in power, whatever. That's kind of seems to be what is actually Orwellian. That was kind of the idea that Orwell created. At least that's my interpretation of it. But if something is just like a bad society, you don't have to call it Orwellian, because it isn't necessarily. But if it does have like an overarching Big Brother thing, maybe it is Orwellian. But my personal opinion on Orwellian is that it probably just does mean the manipulative use of language. But yeah. So in general, to wrap this up, I do believe people are so interested in dystopian because it brings out our own fears, our own worst worries and such. It's also why people are interested in horror, basically. It brings out some of your worst fears, and people have a morbid curiosity for stuff like that. And people also often want to critique their own societies and have fears about that. So, yeah. Hopefully that made sense. Peace. Sorry, almost done. Lucy is sitting in my lap. I'm also thinking of doing like a room tour or something, not this room, my room at home. This is my grandma's house, because I'm really proud of how my room looks. So if anyone's interested in that as like a layover video to like another essay, then that would be cool. So peace.